Having looked at the book of Psalms, we now look at the wisdom books, Proverbs, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. There are two kinds of wisdom, practical wisdom and philosophical wisdom. Practical wisdom is about how to live life, and philosophical wisdom is about how to live with life, how to make sense of life. Proverbs and Song of Songs are about practical wisdom. Ecclesiastes and Job are about philosophical wisdom. Now, that means the wisdom books are about what it means to be a human being. And it fits nicely in the missional framework in terms of the Noahic covenant, because this covenant is about how human beings are to relate to God. So the wisdom books comes under the Noahic covenant. And to make sense of life, to live life truly as a human being, the key is to fear God. What does it mean by the fear of God? Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." 9:10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." Note, wisdom, knowledge, instruction, understanding are different angles of the same thing. Wisdom or knowledge or instruction. Wisdom does not come by itself. Wisdom is the application of knowledge through the understanding of reality as a result of proper instruction. So you see, there are different angles of looking at the same thing. And it tells us what the fear of the Lord is about. Job repeats it in a more succinct way. Job 28:28, "The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding." You see, wisdom, understanding comes together in a package. And finally, Ecclesiastes 12:13, "Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man." So the outcome of fearing God is to keep His commandments. So this connects wisdom with the law. Wisdom is about observing God's commandments, keeping the law of God. Now, this is not just the Old Testament. Look at Colossians 3:22. Paul writing to the church of Colossae, addressing the slaves now. "Slaves, obey your human masters in everything. Don't work only while being watched in order to please men, but work wholeheartedly, fearing the Lord." The fear of the Lord, the fear of God, the fear of Christ, sometimes Paul puts it, is still relevant to the Christian. Because fear of God is about being human. Christians are human. Now, Colossians 3:22 enable us to derive a working definition of fearing God. This can be derived from Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes, but from Colossians, it gives us a very straightforward understanding. Paul says, "Fear God." In other words, do what is right when no one is watching. Don't only work while you are being watched by man to please man. Work wholeheartedly when no one is watching or holding you accountable, fearing God. That means to fear God is to do what is right and not what is wrong when no one, no human being, except God, is watching or holding you accountable. So we use this as a working definition of fearing God. To fear God is to do what is right and not what is wrong when no one except God is watching you or holding you accountable. And that's why the fear of the Lord is to keep His commandments, and this is wisdom. And with this chart, we can see how the fear of God fit into the missional framework. Now, the Noahic covenant is how humanity as a whole, how the world as a whole relate to God through the fear of God. The fear of God is something that even non-believers, people who don't believe in God, understand. Even an atheist understand the fear of God in terms of being conscientious, to do what your conscience tells you. That is the fear of God. So the fear of God is common to all humanity. So under the Noahic covenant, every human being is to fear God and follow the conscience. And God's commandment has been put into human conscience according to Romans 2:14-16. Now under the Mosaic covenant, they are to fear God also, Deuteronomy 10:12-13, because they are human beings. As human beings, they are to fear God. But because God has redeemed them from Egypt and gave them the Mosaic covenant, in addition to fearing God, they are to love God. When you fear God, you keep His commandment. When you love God, you also keep His commandment. Therefore, Israel has an additional motivation to keep God's commandment, in addition to fearing God. For non-believers, for the nations, they are to keep God's commandment motivated by the fear of God. Israel has an additional motivation, the love of God. Because of what God has done for them, they love God, therefore they keep God's commandment. Now for the church, Christians, under the new covenant, there is still the need to fear God. We saw just now in Colossians, and now in Corinthians and Ephesians, Paul repeats that. Fear of Christ, fear God, because we are human beings. In fact, to be a Christian is to be a good human being, to be the human being that God intended. And also, because Christians are redeemed by God through Christ, there is the love of God. So Christians are also motivated to keep God's commandment by loving God. Jesus said, if you love me, you keep my commandments. But the Christian has something in addition to the Israelites under the Mosaic covenant, the Spirit of God. God has put His own Spirit to indwell believers so that when they are filled or walked by the Spirit, they will fulfill the requirement of the law, 8:14. And I have highlighted 2 Corinthians and Ephesians here because you can see 2 Corinthians 5 is about the fear of God, 5:11 is about the fear of God, 5:14 is about the love of God. In the same context, fear God and love God. And then Ephesians 5:21 is about the fear of God, and 5:18 is about being filled with the Spirit. You see, they are related. The fear of God, the love of God, and the Spirit of God are integrated in the life of a believer. So when we look at this chart, you can see how wisdom literature, which is about the fear of God, fit nicely in this bigger framework, and how the fear of God is relevant not only to non-believers, to the Israelites or the Jews, but also to Christians. Now with this in mind, now we begin to look at the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs, as I mentioned earlier, is about how to live life, how to be successful in life. And basically the Proverbs are quite straightforward, and when we read through the book of Proverbs, most of the Proverbs we can understand what it's talking about. But to really make sense of the book as a whole and to maximize its impact in our lives, there are certain things we need to understand about the book of Proverbs. The first thing is the theological assumption behind the Proverbs. Proverbs 3:19 says, "The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding He established the heavens. By His knowledge the deeps broke open, and the clouds dropped down the dew." In other words, when God created the universe and the earth, He built into the universe, the earth, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. In other words, wisdom, knowledge, understanding is what makes the universe it is today. Therefore, when we violate wisdom or knowledge or understanding, we go against the grain of how the universe, how the earth, how the world was created. Because of this, Proverbs 8:34 says, "Blessed is the one who listens to me, wisdom, watching daily at my gates, waiting beside my doors. For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who fails to find me injures himself. All who hate me love death. In other words, without wisdom, we don't live with wisdom. Our life goes against the grain of the way God created the world. Let's call that the created order. There's an order in which God created. And this order has physical, social, and moral dimension. For example, the physical dimension, gravity. God made this world with gravity. And if we violate gravity, say we are in a high building, we are lazy to walk down or take the lift, we say, who cares about gravity? We jump down, we hurt ourselves. So when we go against gravity, we injure ourselves. In the same way, there are also the social and moral dimension to the universe, to human life. For example, Proverbs talk about he who commits adultery will get himself into serious trouble because that violates the moral dimension of the created order, and the social dimension because you steal somebody's wife. So you will injure yourself. So therefore, the created order is such that when we violate it, we will injure ourselves. So therefore, we need wisdom based on knowledge and understanding to navigate the created order so that we will find life and obtain favor from the Lord and not injure ourselves. And that's why we need to cultivate wisdom, which is what the book of Proverbs is all about, to help us cultivate wisdom, to navigate the created order so that we will be blessed instead of being cursed, because we go against the grain of how God created the world, go against the grain, the created order, the order that God built into the universe, built into the world when He created everything. That is the theological assumption. That is the basis of what the book of Proverbs is all about. Now, then there are moral generalizations to give us an idea how the created order works, so that we have an idea how to navigate the created order to find blessing and not experience unnecessary suffering. Proverbs 11:19 says, "Whoever is steadfast in righteousness will live, but he who pursues evil will die. Those of crooked heart are an abomination to the Lord, but those of blameless ways are His delight. Whoever sows injustice reaps calamity, and the rod they wield in fury will be broken. The generous will themselves be blessed, for they share their food with the poor." Now, I call these moral generalizations because these generalizations describe how the created order works. It's a description. It tells us normally this is what happened under normal circumstances. Those who are righteous will live. Those who pursue evil will die. This is how we observe the working of the created order. Those who are crooked heart will suffer. In other words, it is summed up by whoever sows injustice reaps calamity. What we call you reap what we sow. This is actually put together by Paul in Galatians 6:7. "Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." So, the working of the created order can be summarized as you reap what you sow. You sow injustice, you will reap suffering. If you sow justice, you will reap blessing. But again, this is a moral generalization. It is a description of what normally happens. And this is crucial because it is phrased in terms of sowing and reaping. When you sow, a farmer sows, it takes time for the harvest. It takes time for the effect. So therefore, when someone does something bad, he may not immediately suffer. It takes time. So in the short run, he may still be blessed for some other reasons. But in the long run, he will suffer. So in the meantime, you reap what we sow may not seem to come true. Good people may suffer, bad people may prosper, because this is how the created order works. It is usually not immediate, the effect. Sometimes it's immediate. You jump down the building, you fall down. The effect is immediate. But at other times, usually it's not immediate. The effect takes time. Even in the physical dimension, it may take time. For example, in the physical dimension, we need to rest and have enough sleep. When we don't rest enough enough sleep, we may not suffer immediately, but it takes time ultimately. The effect will be there. So in the same way, whether it's a physical, moral, or social dimension, when we violate this order, in the long run, we will suffer. But in the short term, we may not. So this is a moral generalization. So don't think of this generalization as promises. Whoever is steadfast, righteous will live, but whoever pursues evil will die, because it may take time for this to see effect. So it is a description of what normally happens. So this is the moral generalization. And because of this moral generalization, there are practical instructions. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. So based on the moral generalization we saw just now, this is a very practical advice. Do good, because in the long run, you will prosper. But there are practical instructions that we need to take note. What we just seen in Proverbs 3:27 is a moral one. It's a moral instruction. It's based on the 10 Commandments. So therefore, we will have to observe this no matter what. But there are some situations. For example, 6:1 say, "My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor and have given your pledge for a stranger, if you are snared in the words of your mouth, caught in the words of your mouth, then do this, my son, and save yourself. For you have come into the hand of your neighbor. Go hasten and plead urgently with your neighbor." What it means is this: if you have become a guarantor of a neighbor or pledge as a stranger, then these Proverbs instruct you to go ahead and plead your neighbor to let you go. Because why? 11:15. "Whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer harm, but he who hates striking hands in pledge is secure." In other words, based on observation, very often when you become the guarantor of somebody, especially somebody you don't know very well, you suffer harm, generally speaking. A lot of people go bankrupt because of being a guarantor of someone who did not uphold the commitment. So this is a generalization, and this generalization is not exactly moral. If this is the observation, then be careful. So the instruction is not about moral righteousness and justice, unlike 3:27. "Do not withhold good." That is moral. We have to observe that no matter what. But in the case of being a guarantor of somebody, it is non-moral. It has to do with prudence and discretion. You see, wisdom, the fear of the Lord, will result in living just and righteous life, will do what is just and righteous. So do not withhold good is being just and righteous. But whether to become the guarantor, to put up security for somebody, your neighbor, is about being prudent or discreet. Prudence and discretion. Prudence is about deciding a decision to be cautious in light of the observation. Discretion is about discernment as what is appropriate to do. So these are non-moral. So Proverbs teaches what is moral and non-moral. So in the area of non-moral wisdom, in this case, if we know that this person we have been guaranteed to is trustworthy, we have reason to believe is trustworthy, so we are prudent, we check his background. And then the amount that we need in case he run away, the amount I have to pay, I can handle it. That is discretion, what is appropriate. Then we realize that we are prudent, we are discreet, can go ahead to help somebody. Because if nobody become guarantor of anybody, then a lot of people in need of a guarantor will be in trouble. Then they end up not being just and righteous. So we need to understand the practical instructions in terms of the moral generalization. In area of moral instruction, we have to observe, no matter what. But non-moral instruction, like being guarantor, we need to use prudence and discretion. And the book of Proverbs teaches us prudence and discretion as well. So this is about how to make use of Proverbs in our daily life. But there is one dimension that I like to highlight, because Proverbs 1 to 9, you can see the flow of thought. It's easy to understand what it is saying. And Proverbs 30 and 31 also is like lectures. But Proverbs 10 to 29, the Proverbs seems very discreet, no connection. And there are so many Proverbs. So we tend to take them as individual Proverbs, individual verses. But if we do that, we fail to fully apply the teaching of Proverbs. Look at this example to see how we can look at clusters. A good example here, Proverbs 15, 27 to 29. Whoever is greedy for unjust gain troubles his own household, but he who hates bribes will live. Now, this proverb stands by itself. It is a moral generalization, and it indirectly instructs us how to live in light of this moral generalization. And then the heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. And this is also a moral generalization. That's how the righteous function and how the wicked operates. The righteous will ponder how to answer, the wicked will pour out evil things. So it stands by itself. Then third one, the Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. Now this is not based on observation, based on revelation. So some of the Proverbs are not based on observation, but based on revelation, like this case. And it stands by itself. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. Now, if we take them as completely discrete Proverbs, then we will miss something very crucial, how Proverbs can be powerfully applied in different situations in our life. What we can do is, when we come to Proverbs like this, they seem discrete, no connection with one another. Look at the situation in which all the three Proverbs applies. Because each of the Proverbs describe the functioning of the created order. And all three may be relevant in a particular situation, because all situation is governed by the created order. In whatever situation, when we violate the created order, we suffer. So here, these three Proverbs are different descriptions of how the created order function. And all three may function in the same situation. Think of a situation where all three are relevant. Once the obvious situation that is often thought of is the situation of a judge about to give a verdict. Now, then you think in terms of a judge giving a verdict, then all three applies. It tells the judge, do not be greedy, because it will trouble your household. Because when you accept bribe, you will, in the long run, get into trouble. And be righteous. So when you are righteous in heart, you will ponder how to answer, how to make a just verdict. But if you are not, if you are wicked, you pour out evil things, you will make a verdict that is unjust. You convict an innocent person because you accept bribe. And then the warning is, the Lord is far from the wicked. If you are wicked in making unjust decision, be careful, because the Lord hears the prayer of the righteous. So you see, all three are relevant in the context of a judge making a decision. So in this way, we can see how these so seemingly discrete proverbs can be used powerfully to guide a person in a certain situation. And it can be more than one situation where the proverbs apply. For example, this also applies in the situation of a police officer who investigates a crime. and he may be bribed or tempted to bribe to give false testimony in court. So these three proverbs applies to his situation also, and not just a police officer. It can also apply to, say, a blogger hired, that is bribed, to write fake news to victimize a consensual politician or a businessman. And these three proverbs also apply to his situation. What should he write in his blog? Should he accept bribe? Allow himself to be hired to spread fake news to victimize righteous people? So you see, this illustrates how we can take proverbs that are discrete. It may not be together in the same chapter. It could be one proverb from one chapter, another proverb in a different chapter, because every proverb that generalizes how the created order functions can be put together, because it's the same created order. They describe the functioning of created order in different ways, and they all function together in a situation where they're all relevant. So with this in mind, we can make sense of the book of Proverbs and apply it in a powerful way. Now, Proverbs is about how to live life, how to be successful in living in general. It also covers the area of sexuality. For example, it warns against committing adultery and so on. But there is a book that specially focuses on how to live life with respect to a delicate aspect of life, that is sexuality. Song of Songs. Now, Song of Song is about sexual intimacy. It is very clear in these few verses. Now, this text is kind of a climax of the book. It describes what happened on the wedding night. The bride speaking, "Awake, north wind, rise up, south wind, blow on my garden, and spread its fragrance all around. Come into your garden, my love, taste its finest fruit." Now, Song of Songs uses a lot of imagery because it is about sexual intimacy. It actually describes sexuality, sex, in a rather explicit way, but it is couched in imagery. Here, the garden refers to the woman's body. In Song of Songs, sometimes the word vineyard is used, vineyard or garden. So here, garden refers to the woman's body. So when you read this verse and think of my garden as my body, then you see what she is inviting her husband on the wedding night to do. And chapter 5 verse 1 is the husband's response. "I have entered my garden, my treasure, my bride. I gather myrrh with my spices and eat honeycomb with my honey. I drink wine with my milk." Now, what is he doing? Walking in the garden, smelling spices, and so on. When you think of the garden as a woman's body, then this imagery describes rather explicitly what is happening here. Is what happened on the wedding night. And then the chorus is a song, so there's a chorus. "Oh, lover and beloved, eat and drink. Yes, drink deeply of your love." So when we understand the imagery of the Song of Songs and how it describes sexual intimacy, everything falls in place. So this describes the wedding night, the enjoyment of sexual intimacy. Now, Song of Song has been interpreted differently, but the best way to make sense of it is to see the part of the song before the wedding, that is before 3:6. Chapter 3 verse 6 describes the wedding, and this describes the consummation of sexual intimacy on the wedding night. Before that, the song should be understood as anticipation of sexual intimacy. The bride is looking forward to the wedding. So she expresses her anticipation of sexual intimacy. And after this, that is the consummation of sexual intimacy on the wedding night, what we read is continuation of sexual intimacy. And we can read about tension, conflict in the marriage, because the best of marriage is not 100% perfect. There will be conflict, and see how that conflict can be overcome. And then the last part of the song is about retrospection, reflecting back on how they have come together and the journey of sexual intimacy. So the Song of Song, before 3:6 is anticipation of sexual intimacy. Then here, the middle, the wedding, is consummation of sexual intimacy, followed by continuation of sexual intimacy, built into it conflicts in the relationship. And then finally, the last part is contemplation, reflecting back, retrospection of sexual intimacy. So if you keep this in mind, it will help you to make sense of the song. Now, basically, the song has a very powerful teaching about how to truly experience and enjoy sexual intimacy. Sexual intimacy should be experienced and enjoyed in 3 contexts. The first context is this: abiding commitment, that is a secure marriage. Now, Song 4:12, this is spoken on the wedding night. The husband, we saw how the bride responded just now. This is what the husband say on the wedding night. A garden lock is my sister, my bride. A spring lock, a seal fountain. Now this, the garden refers to the body, is my sister, my bride. A lock spring is lock. Now the spring is the water come out. Spring and fountain in Proverbs refers to sexual relationship. So it's a spring lock, a fountain, seal. In other words, the bride was not accessible physically to even him until this point on the wedding night. That means it teaches against sex before marriage. So this is what the husband said. And the wife responded and asked him to come into your garden, we read just now. And the husband said, I have entered the garden, and so on. And at the end, in their retrospection of sexual intimacy, they recognize what love is and should be. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death. Jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. It talks about the nature of true love. It cannot be quenched. So the first context for sexual intimacy to be experienced, is enjoyed, is a secure, abiding commitment, relationship, a secure marriage. It's very clear here. Now this is crucial for the woman to truly enjoy sexual intimacy. The second context, I don't put up any verses because it's everywhere in the song, is in the context of mutual adoration. You read through the Song of Songs, you can see how they adore each other. Surely on the wedding night, on the wedding day, they adore each other. But very often, after the honeymoon, the couple begin to have problem. And how to maintain that mutual adoration? The need for the fear of God, to accept one another and to love one another, to forgive one another. So this is crucial. For both husband and wife to truly enjoy sexual intimacy. And the third condition is expressed in these 3 verses, which is about the same thing. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand embraces me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does of the field, that you do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. And the two verses basically repeat the same thing. Do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. Now the love here, in the context of the song, is sexual love. It means sexual intimacy is to be experienced and enjoyed in the context of legitimate arousal. In other words, this is particularly crucial for the man. There should not be arousal of sexual love, sexual passion until it pleases. It should be in the right context between husband and wife. So when a man is sexually aroused so easily everywhere, that weakens his ability to truly enjoy sexual intimacy with his wife. So these are the three contexts to truly experience and enjoy sexual intimacy. So you see, Song of Songs has a very, very important teaching, especially for today. Sexuality has gone haywire. Now we move on to philosophical wisdom. Philosophical wisdom is about how to live with life, how to make sense of life, because life often does not seem to make sense, especially in light of the certainty of death and uncertainties of life. We need to make sense of why we are born into the world, filled with woes, to live a life full of cares, and then die. And when we die, we leave everything behind. And life is so uncertain. We don't know when bad things will happen to us. And we can die suddenly, die young. So these things cause people to ask, what is life all about? And we need to make sense of life. So the book of Proverbs teaches us how to make sense of life in light of the certainty of death and the uncertainties of life. First of all, the theme of Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Now, what does it mean by all is vanity? In this context, it means all is profitless, because it answers the rhetorical question, what does man gain by all his toil, which he toil under the sun? No gain. The answer is no gain, no profit. So all is vanity means there's no profit under the sun. In this temporal world, there is no profit. But that may seem a bit pessimistic, but look at the context. A generation goes. In other words, it is talking about the context of death. This is confirmed in 12:7 when the theme is repeated. And dust returns to the earth as it was, clearly talking about death. And the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. So you see, the Ecclesiastes is a speech. The speech begins with announcing the theme, all is vanity, and followed by a poem that begins about death. A generation goes. And then when the theme is repeated at the end, towards the end of the speech, it is followed by a poem that is about death. So in other words, all is profitless in light of death. In other words, in light of death, what we gain in this world is ultimately profitless, because we have to leave everything behind. That is what it means by all is vanity. It simply means because of death, we have to leave everything we gain in this world. Therefore, all that we gain is ultimately profitless. And because life is uncertain, we may even die young. We may not even know when we lose everything we have gained. So all is vanity. So it is not pessimistic. It is simply be realistic. And we need to learn to come to terms with this reality because of the certainty of death and the uncertainty of life. How to come to terms with this reality that all is vanity. So this is a theme, very clear. Chapter 1 verse 12, 1, 2, and then chapter 12 verse 8. Beginning, end, all is vanity. because all is vanity, Ecclesiastes 12:13 says, when all has been heard, the conclusion of the matter is, heard what? All is vanity. Fear God and keep His commandment, because this is for all humanity. For God will bring every act to judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. In other words, because all is vanity, therefore, fear God and keep His commandment. Why? Because this is God's purpose for humanity, because this is for all humanity. This is why God created humanity, to fear Him and keep His commandments. And He will bring every act to judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil, on the basis of whether humanity keep His commandments or not. Because that is the purpose. God created humanity. He will judge everyone, every act, on the basis of whether they fear God and keep His commandments or not. Now, this judgment has to be judgment after death, because it is judgment of every hidden thing, whether good or evil. You see, every act, including hidden thing, good or evil, such a comprehensive judgment has to be a judgment after death. This is the judgment that Daniel talked about at the end of history. Those who pass the test will have everlasting life. Those who don't will have everlasting shame. Now, why is it that because all is vanity, we need to fear God? That is argument. 3:14 gives us a clue. And I know that whatever God does is final. Nothing can be added to it or taken from it. God so works that people should fear Him. Now, God works in this world. That is, allow the certainty of death and uncertainties of life, and cause uncertainties to work in such a way that people should fear Him. God is working in this world so that people would fulfill His purpose to fear Him and keep His commandment. How does He do that? Very briefly, first of all, because all is vanity, you have to leave everything behind. The book admonishes us to enjoy what we have. There is no point trying to gain more and more of the things of this world, and in the process, do not enjoy what we have. So that is to make sense of the vanity of life. If you have to leave everything behind, better enjoy them while we still have them, before we lose them forever. But the book also says, to truly enjoy life, you need to be carefree. When we are full of cares, we cannot enjoy what we have. And the book said to be carefree, you need to keep His commandment, because when you violate God's commandments, you cannot be carefree. And the 10th commandment, you shall not covet. When people are covetousness, by very nature of covetousness, the person is not carefree. It's full of cares. So, unless people keep God's commandment through fearing God, they cannot be carefree and cannot truly enjoy life. So this is one explanation why, because all is vanity, people should fear God. Also because life is uncertain. Even good people can experience bad things. We do not know when bad things can happen. So we need to be able to come to terms with uncertainty of life. We need to be able to feel secure, so that to be carefree. How can we do that? We need to fear God, so that we worship Him, so that we can have the assurance that He's watching over us. You see, to believe that He is watching over us so that we can be carefree, we need to believe that He's watching us. And when we believe that God is watching us, we fear God. Remember, that is the working definition of fearing God. Therefore, you see, for two reasons. Why? Because all is vanity. Because of death, certainty of death, uncertainties of life, we need to fear God and keep His commandments. So that is basically the message of Ecclesiastes. Now, with this, we can see how wisdom literature fit into this missional framework, including consummation. Because Ecclesiastes talk about the final judgment that we read in Isaiah 65, Daniel 12, as well as Revelation 20. Ecclesiastes is about how to live with life. Make sense of life. But there is one aspect of life which comes under uncertainty of life that is especially traumatic. It is this observation. Ecclesiastes 7:15. During the days of my fleeting life, I have seen both these things. Sometimes a righteous person dies prematurely in spite of his righteousness, and sometimes a wicked person lives long in spite of his evil deeds. We observe this ourselves. 8:14. Here is another enigma that occurs on earth. Sometimes there are righteous people who get what the wicked deserve, and sometimes there are wicked people who get what the righteous deserve. I said this also is an enigma. We have observed this. It's talking about the same thing from two different angles. So, the problem of undeserved suffering. Life is so uncertain that a truly righteous person like Job can suffer, not because he has done anything wrong. So, how to come to terms with this? Ecclesiastes together with Job help us to understand. You see, God so works that people should fear him. Remember? Including allowing undeserved suffering. How does undeserved suffering help people to fear God? Job 1:9. Satan answered the Lord, does Job fear God for nothing? You see, God was boasting about Job's righteousness, how God-fearing he is to Satan. And Satan said, does Job fear God for nothing? In other words, Job fear you and be righteous for something because you bless him. You take away blessing from him, he will curse you. And God said, let's try and see. And that is what the book of Job is about. And we saw how Job passed the test. God allowed Satan to take away everything he owns, including his children. He did not curse God. And then God also allowed Satan to take away his health. He suffered, almost died, and he did not curse God. So Job proved that he did not fear God because of what God gives. He feared God for nothing. He feared God for who he is. That is true fear of God. So if that is what it means to truly fear God, then we need to look at Ecclesiastes 3:14. God so worked, and God works that people should fear him and fear him for nothing. In other words, God worked in such a way that people should fear him for nothing. Now imagine if God guarantees that if you are God-fearing, if you are righteous, you will always be blessed with material things, with health and wealth. If God guarantees that, knowing fallen human nature, do you think there will be any people who truly fear God for nothing? When God guarantees that if you are righteous, God-fearing, you will always be blessed. No, God cannot guarantee that. So God has to allow undeserved suffering so that when people fear him, they fear him for nothing. So you see, even unrighteous, undeserved suffering serve the purpose. So this gives the answer to why God allows undeserved suffering. So this enables us to come to terms with undeserved suffering. And the book of Job has been a blessing to so many believers. But this is a theoretical understanding. Well, when we are not suffering, it's good to know this so that we are able to answer atheists who use suffering as a reason, as an argument why God doesn't exist. If God exists, why are they suffering? So this will help us to respond to that. But when a person is truly suffering, this is not the answer he needs. Let's see how God responded to Job's suffering. How God answered Job's suffering. Now, if you have read the book of Job, you know that most of the book of Job is a dialogue between Job and his three friends. Job lost everything, he was suffering, and his three friends came supposedly to comfort him. And there is a dialogue, a debate, 3 rounds. Job began with cursing his birth, and then his first friend, Eliphaz, will say something, and he will respond, and then his second friend, Bildad, will say something, and he will respond, and then his third friend, Zophar, will say something, and he will respond. But the debate end up in a deadlock. You see, all his three friends say in different ways, from different angles, that Job, you suffer because you have sinned, therefore repent. And Job's response to them is, I have not sinned, I have not sinned. You see, Job himself also used to think the same thing. You know, you reap what you sow. So you suffer, that means you reap what you sow, you must have sinned. So Job himself was troubled. And when the three friends keep saying this, and he kept denying, it really troubled him. And it came to a deadlock. In the third round, the second friend, Zophar's, Bildad's response was very short, and Zophar didn't even respond, pointing to the fact that it's a deadlock. You see, when we use human reason to either argue one way or another concerning undeserved suffering, it will be a deadlock. And if you read philosophical literature, you see it's a deadlock. But after the deadlock, there is this beautiful hymn, whether written by Job or by the narrator, we are not sure. It says, from where then does wisdom come? And where is the place of understanding? It is hidden from the eyes of all living and concealed from the birds of the air. God understands the way to it, and he knows its place, for he looks to the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. And he said to man, behold, the fear of the Lord is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding. In other words, it clearly says that wisdom and understanding comes from God. Only God has the wisdom and the understanding and the knowledge to explain undeserved suffering. It's hidden from human eyes. So when we use human wisdom, human understanding, human reason to deal with the problem of undeserved suffering, whether to attack the existence of God or to defend the existence of God, it will be a deadlock. You need to go to God. Therefore, after this hymn, Job make a very impassioned plea to challenge God to answer. God must respond because only God can break the deadlock. And how does God break the deadlock? Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will answer you, and you will make it known to me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched out the line upon it? So God is saying that Job was arguing with his friend without knowledge and understanding. So God asked him questions. He began with questions concerning the design and the working of the universe, as seen here. Then later he also asked him questions concerning the design and the working of the animal world. For example, 39:26, is it by your understanding that the hawk soars and spread his wing towards the south? Why does the hawk, this bird, not only can fly, but know how to migrate south during winter? Is it by your understanding? You see, God put his understanding into the created order, right? God put his wisdom, his knowledge, understanding into the genes of the bird, so that the bird not only know how to fly instinctively, and also instinctively know how to migrate when the time comes. So, in other words, God asked Job a series of questions about the design and working of the universe and the animal world, and none of these questions Job can answer. This is to overwhelm Job with the idea that God is all-wise. Job argued, and also his friend argued from very limited understanding of how the universe functions, how it works, out of ignorance. Secondly, God overwhelms Job with a sense of God's power. Behold, Behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. Can one take him by his eyes, or pierce his nose with a snare? Then about Leviathan. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook, or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? No one is so fierce that he dares to stir him up. Who then is he who can stand before him? Now, scholars are divided whether it refers to just a physical animal or refers to a mythical animal. Behemoth, if it refers to a physical animal, the closest will be hippopotamus. Leviathan, the closest will be a crocodile. But there's reason to believe that Job or God is using these animals as a symbol, as a figure of speech to refer to cosmic forces. Leviathan in the book of Job itself refers to a mythical monster of the sea. They create chaos. Leviathan elsewhere in book of Job and in Isaiah symbolizes evil, the power of evil in this world. And Behemoth symbolizes death. In other words, God is saying to Job, do we have power to overcome death, power to overcome evil? Even if you don't take it as mythical forces symbolizing power of death and evil, human being cannot overpower hippopotamus or the crocodile. So it still talk about God has power that human beings don't have. But it makes better sense to see it as death and evil, because the book of Job is about death and evil. God is saying, I have power to overcome death, I have power to overcome evil. What it means is this. In response to Job, he didn't explain why he suffered. He didn't explain what we saw just now. Using Ecclesiastes, God so worked the measure of him for nothing. He cannot guarantee, promise all righteous people will not suffer. So he allowed some people to suffer. Job was one of them. He did not use this explanation, because if he uses this explanation, someone who is suffering like Job will say, why choose me to be the example that righteous people do suffer? So you see, when people are suffering like Job, God's answer is different. God overwhelms Job with a sense that he's all wise and he's all powerful. And this is what Job needed to hear. And he was happy with that. He repented and eventually he was blessed. Now this is crucial. When a person goes through suffering, undeserved suffering, all he needs to know is God is all wise and he's all powerful. Because God is all powerful, he can stop the suffering. He has power over evil. He can stop the suffering. He can stop evil against me. He can stop death. He can even keep me alive. He has power over death and evil. So he has assurance that God can remove the suffering anytime he wants. And because God is all wise, God knows what he's doing. If he doesn't remove the suffering now, he has a reason. He has a purpose. He's wise. And what's the reason and the purpose? We just saw. God so worked that man should fear him for nothing. And this is crucial. God answered Job by highlighting these two aspects of his nature. He's all wise, he's all powerful. Now, we can use this to respond to atheists, in addition to what we saw just now. The atheist says, since there's evil in this world, including undeserved suffering in this world, God doesn't exist. Or at least God of the Bible. Why? Because the God of the Bible is all loving, right? And he's all powerful. And we don't deny that. The God of the Bible is all powerful and all loving. Now, they argue, if God is all powerful, he can stop evil and undeserved suffering. He can do that. And if God is all loving, he will stop undeserved suffering. Right? If God is all powerful, he can stop undeserved suffering. If he's all loving, he will stop undeserved suffering. But there is undeserved suffering. So therefore, either God is not all powerful, or he's not all loving, or both. Therefore, God does not exist. So very easy argument. You see, they pair God's all loving and all powerful together. Why? But God pairs God's all wisdom and all power together, not all loving. You see, because when you think of God as all loving, we only think of what is best for us. But when God is all wise, the loving thing to do, stop undeserved suffering, supposedly loving to do, is not the wise thing to do. You see, when you pair, God is all wise and all powerful, we don't see a problem with undeserved suffering. And in fact, because God is all loving, it is more difficult to do the wise thing. This shows how loving God is. He needs to do the wise thing. Just like parents who truly know how to raise their children, sometimes may allow the children to suffer, to discipline them a little bit, to do the wise thing. The wise thing may not be the loving thing. In fact, to do the wise thing when it is a painful thing to do, show God, all the more God is all loving. So you see, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's only with the fear of God we know how to live life. It's only with the fear of God we can understand, make sense of life, including the certainty of death and the uncertainties of life. So therefore, you see the wisdom literature covers both. Practical wisdom, Job and Song of Solomon, how to live life. Proverbs, life in general. Song of Song, one aspect of life, a delicate aspect of life, sexuality. Ecclesiastes, how to live with life, how to make sense of life in general, including suffering. And the book of Job deal with the problem of how to make sense of one aspect of life, an intricate aspect of life, suffering. So it's comprehensive. So you see, God has given us all the resources we need to know how to live life and know how to live with life.